Well, here we are. My name's Tom Osman, and this is Whatever Comes Next. It's the podcast where I explore the world of underground and independent music making. And on today's episode, I'm talking with alternative rock artist Dolly Dagger, who has just recently put out her latest single, Tower, which you can see the Dolly directed video for on YouTube. You can check out Dolly's music online on Spotify. You can also go to her Instagram account, which is where she's most active, Dolly Dagger underscore XO. But before I get into talking about Dolly a little bit more and get into the interview with her, I want to give a little bit of a background into this podcast. So you probably see in the description, this is episode 15, but this is the first episode where I'm actually putting it out as a video. So if you want to go back to episodes 1 to 14, they are on Spotify, whatever comes next. And they're also on Substack, which is where they originated, tomosman.substack.com. And so I've been covering music in one way or another for about the past, I'm not sure, 6, 7 years, something like that. And I started out purely as kind of fan writing, writing for a website called Blessed Altazine, who cover extreme metal, underground extreme metal. And so I was doing that for a couple of years, writing regular reviews, and I gradually crept my way into doing interviews, doing basically email interviews, send out a bunch of questions, get your answers back, write it up. At a certain point, I had this idea that I wanted to write a book, and I wanted to write a book that would explore this independent world of music makers, and not just music makers, but also record label owners and distributors, producers, all these people who are operating at this DIY level. Because at a certain point in my life, I guess this happened gradually, I started to realize that musicians aren't necessarily getting a career out of this. And that might seem like a really obvious thing to say. If you are an independent artist, you're probably well aware of that. But it's not something that I realized, for example, when I was a teenager. And I used to buy the New Musical Express when I lived in Scotland, and I'd see all these articles about these bands. I just sort of thought of them as being these rock stars. Um, and I guess they were. I guess the climate has changed significantly. Record labels are not pumping money into artists the way they were in the past. Although, it's not all like, oh, there was this great support and now there's not, because I know a lot of bands over the years have had terrible deals where they seem to have been generating a lot of sales, but they weren't necessarily ending up with a lot of money themselves. But anyway, one way or another, the landscape has changed. Now we have streaming services, and this is one of these big topics, the question of the impact that that's having on artists and their ability to make money out of their music. So I wanted to explore that. And I naively thought, I having previously worked in publishing, I thought, well, I if I have the right concept, if I have the right pitch, I can go to a publisher and I can pitch this idea of this book that I want to write, and they'll agree to it. And then I can go off and I can talk to all these different bands that I want to talk to. And I think I was sort of having things the wrong way around, because at that time I thought, right, if I want to talk to these people who are not, global superstars, but I want to talk to people like Henry Rollins, or I want to talk to people like Steve Albini. And I thought, well, I'm not going to be able to just talk to them by emailing them. So if I have a book behind me, I can do this, because one of the things from working in publishing that I'm aware of is that self-publishing a book, it tends to just look kind of cheap. So I wanted to have that sort of professional backing to what I was doing. But I realized quite quickly it's not that simple. So an important step in the process of all of this, which is leading to the podcast, is that my dad gave me this book, Out of Thin Air, by Michael Crawley. And it's a book about running. It's a book about long distance running and about why Ethiopia is disproportionately represented with elite level runners. And so the author goes to Ethiopia and he runs with these elite level runners. Now, part of the personal thread of the story is that Michael Crawley is he's an anthropologist, but he's also a marathon runner as a hobby, essentially. And so he wants to improve his marathon time to get it below a certain level. So you've got this personal thread going through the book that he's going to Ethiopia and he's trying to improve his time. But he's also going to Ethiopia to spend time as an anthropologist with these people to understand what it is about the environment, about the culture, about the way that people are brought up and what their surroundings are, that they are able to produce so many high level long distance running performances. I thought, oh, I could do a similar thing with underground music. I could go not necessarily just to one place, but I could, go to France, I could go to Sweden, I could go to LA, and I could spend time, maybe a couple of weeks at a time with different people. I could spend time with a producer or a record label owner or a distributor or a guitarist. And I could put all of that together, all of this insight about the different practical aspects of what it is like to be an independent musician or an independent DIY person within this different world, whatever their role might be, and somehow put together a picture which would be, potentially entertaining for people, but also actually as I don't want necessarily want to say as a manual or a how-to guide, but um, an insight into the different practicalities of what is necessary and what some of the dangers and the pitfalls are, for example, so that anybody who wanted to pursue I don't even know if a career in music is quite the way to put it, but anybody who wants to go out there and to tour and to make records, what are some of the things that are worth considering or important to consider? So I ended up getting in touch with Michael Crawley, and he gave me some very helpful insight. But one of the things that I discovered was that this book came about as a PhD project, first of all. So it was a funded PhD to go to Ethiopia and to spend this time to do the research, do the interviews. Having done that and having written his PhD, he was then able to go to a publisher with all of these interviews that he'd done and actually create the proposal for the book. So I realized at that stage, hmm, uh, I'm not doing a PhD, and I also am not writing for newspapers and magazines. I don't have like a print CV that I can use to pitch to a publisher. So at that stage, I decided, okay, I need to go down a bit more of a professional route. So I did a feature writing course with the London School of Journalism, which got me into various different steps of where I am now. So I started writing for an American magazine called New Noise Magazine, and I started writing for a website called Ghost Cult Magazine, both directly from projects that I had in this course. So along that process, I started talking to higher profile bands. I started doing Zoom interviews. I started doing phone interviews. I started making more connections. So in the past, when I'd just been working for Blessed Altazine, I very naively thought like, okay, I'm going to go onto Bandcamp. Here's a band. It says contact the band. I'm just going to send the email there and I'm going to say, hey, I'm writing for Blessed Altazine and I'd like to interview you. And sometimes I got results from that, sometimes I didn't. I sort of noticed, I would say fairly quickly, there was a certain kind of glass ceiling, even though I couldn't see exactly where it was. Some bands would reply, and then I felt like if I tried to go like a little bit higher, I just wouldn't get any response. Well, once I started working for New Noise Magazine and Ghost Cult Magazine, I started to learn about some of the different aspects behind the scenes of what's like appropriate to do. So with some bands, yes, you can talk to them directly, but other bands have got publicists. Other bands have got record labels where the owner will speak for them, or maybe they've got a manager. And so I started to get a bit more of a picture. I started to make more connections. I started to build relationships with publicists. I started to build relationships with certain record labels. So now I'm on various promo lists where I get sent pre-release material for albums or for singles or whatever. I get promotional information about tours. I get information about bands that are interested in being interviewed. And so all this sort of like built up my awareness of what's going on behind the scenes. And it also built up the possibility of the different people that I could talk to. Anyway, in amongst all of this, I discovered a podcast called Every Album Ever with Mike and Alex. And the premise for the podcast, which has been going for about 4 years at this stage, I would say, was originally that Mike and Alex will take a band and they will listen to all of their albums before the episode, and then they will chronologically go through the albums or the main releases and they'll talk about them. And at a certain point, so I think for whatever reason, a lot of people discovered the podcast with their Butthole Surfers episode, which is how I discovered them. So they'd already been going for about 2 years at this point. And I ended up starting up a conversation through email with Mike Mansour of the podcast. And it went back and forth for a while, a bit of a bromance. And then eventually, in one email exchange, Mike made some comment where he was sort of lightly lamenting the fact that they don't get the opportunity to spend much time to actually research the bands and their stories. So I said, I'll do that for you. And so that's how I started doing research for every album ever with Mike and Alex. So initially, what I was doing was basically getting background research, getting background information. I would try to do something a little bit more interesting than just go to Wikipedia, because that's basically what they were using before. So I would find interviews, I would, find other websites, other content. Maybe I'd watch videos. Sometimes I put some of my own personal comments in as well, because I tried to make it a bit personalized, but I also didn't want to, sort of like push myself into the podcast too much. So anyway, after doing this for a while, I actually managed to interview a few bands for content for the podcast. What this eventually led to, which is basically the origin of this podcast, is that I interviewed the band Scream for New Noise magazine. And Scream, this was last year, had released DC Special, which was their first album in 30 years on Discord Records, which is where they'd started out. And I absolutely love this album. Like, it's not really necessary to say it, but I would say it's like probably my favorite album of last year. And the guys were great. And in the midst of this interview, the singer, Peter Stahl, said, I mean, I guess it could have been an offhand comment, but he said, if you'd like to talk about the lyrics specifically of the album, we could do another interview and we could talk about it there. And after the interview, sometime later, I think I suggested to Mike, oh, maybe you'd like to do an episode on DC Special, because now, as well as having these long episodes where they talk about the discographies of a band, Mike and Alex also have these standalone episodes where they'll talk about an individual album. And so sometimes I'll get them advanced promos. So I had suggested that they do a DC Special episode, which Mike was enthusiastic about doing. Mike's a big punk and hardcore fan. So then I had the idea, well, what if I could get some exclusive interview content for Peter Stahl, who would be a much bigger name than anyone that I had managed to speak to for every album with Mike and Alex up to that point. And I then thought, well, if I'm going to get content and I'm going to be able to speak to him again, what about if I could actually have the audio put out as an episode? Because I'd done audio interviews at this point with Blessed Altazine, which would be hosted on Bandcamp. And I'd done episodes for Ghost Cult Magazine, which they would put on their own Ghost Cult channel on Spotify. So I was already out there doing audio interviews, but I hadn't done anything that was really, myself. So I managed to organize the second interview with Peter Stahl. I have to give great thanks to Dan at Discipline PR, who was representing Scream for this album. And basically, the story of this podcast so far, in terms of the guests that I've got, is largely a story of the publicists behind the scenes who have facilitated me talking to these bands. Something that I wasn't aware of when I first started writing for Blessed Altazine, like, oh, they're a publicist. And generally, you can't search them online. You can't go like Scream Band, who is their publicist? You need to get into this world to be able to find out who these people are. So anyway, Dan has been incredibly supportive. I've talked to, some of my absolute heroes through him. He represents really great bands. And I'm always interested in the music that he's representing. And there are several people that I've interviewed through him for this podcast. And there are interviews coming up which are through him as well. So it's not just about Dan. There are other publicists as well who I will probably shout out in future episodes, but he is one of the kind of the primary people that really enabled me to start this podcast. So anyway, he set up the interview with Peter Stahl, and I got some content for the Every Album Ever with Mike and Alex episode. And then I had this audio interview. So I said, right, okay, where am I going to put it? Well, I already had this Substack kind of newsletter, regular newsletter going on. And I realized, oh, they host podcasts. So I could put this as a podcast episode. Now, as crazy as it might sound to say this, even though I knew that I was recording a podcast episode and I knew I was going to put it out as a podcast, somehow this didn't really click in my brain where I would go, so now you have a podcast. But so I did that. And then subsequently, a couple of other opportunities came up to talk to people that Mike and Alex were going to be covering for singles episodes. So the second episode, Bronson Arm, that interview was tied together with a Bronson Arm episode that Mike and Alex did. Third episode with Pejmon of Satyasena. That was also tied into an Every Album Ever with Mike and Alex episode. So at this point, I had three episodes of whatever comes next. So at this point, I'd sort of accepted that, well, I've got a podcast now. But I also hadn't really properly crystallized what the podcast was about because I didn't really have this book idea in mind of exploring this international community of DIY independent artists and the practical aspects of succeeding in this world. Although when I started the Substack, that was actually exactly what I mentioned the first Substack article. But anyway, after having done a few episodes, I started to sort of think a little bit more clearly about what I was doing, and I started to try and reach out and get just different people that I wanted to talk to. So if you go through the episodes of whatever comes next, the styles of music can vary. You know, there is kind of an emphasis on sort of the noise rock and the alternative rock and the metal side of things, but I've spoken to sort of electronic artists, and there's been like pop elements to some of the people that I've spoken to. In fact, the next episode that's coming up is going to be extreme metal again, so it's going back in that direction, but it's not really genre specific. It is more about people operating at an independent level. So anyway, as the episodes progressed, I started to think a little bit more clearly about what the purpose of all of this is. And I realized that, well, this podcast really is kind of an extension of my ultimate goal, which is to write this book. And in order to write this book, I need to get all of the insights that I can from, this world of independent artists around me. And I'm sort of in that regularly, whether it's for this podcast or whether it's other interviews that I'm doing. I am building up my knowledge in this area, and the more that I talk to people, the more I sort of have an idea of what some of these really relevant questions are, outside of the usual things of this person has something to promote and we're going to talk about that, and I do that. And in the case of Dolly Dagger as well, that's also the case. But there's also that strand of understanding the practical side of things, which I hope can be entertaining as well as informative for people who are interested in sort of pursuing that themselves. I've probably repeated myself here. I've probably missed out things that I wanted to say, but that broadly is kind of an overview of what this podcast is about. And as these episodes progress, you will find, I think, that I become more and more focused into this because in the last couple of interviews that I've done, which haven't been published yet, um, I've got more into this topic within the interviews, of actually telling them this is ultimately what my purpose is with this. And yeah, I can feel that there is enthusiasm out there amongst independent artists who feel that there is no kind of like guide for them in how to navigate this world. A lot of it is through trial and error. So I think there's a lot of insight to be had out there. I think there's a lot of people who are interested in sharing that insight. And it's my role here to be able to figure out what are the most useful questions to be able to draw that insight out of them. So anyway, episode 15, Dolly Dagger. Dolly was someone that I was really enthusiastic to talk to once I learned a bit about her. So aside from the fact that I really like her music, everybody that I interview on this podcast makes music that I like, or they're involved in music that I like. Because if I had to fake it, it would be, a stress. So I listened to all of the music she has out there. Not a huge amount of music, which is available that's been recorded. And we do also get into the fact in the interview that she has written plenty of songs, but it's just having the opportunity, having the money, having the time to record them. But aside from the fact that I really like the music, I realized that Dolly is someone that has a very hands-on approach when it comes to a lot of these aspects that I'm discovering are so relevant in terms of the question of how independent artists manage to, find some kind of world or find some kind of space in the music world right now. So the booking of the tours, the making of videos, how much time you spend on social media, what value streaming services have. So we got into a lot of the practical dimensions that Dolly's involved with. We talked about, publicists. We talked about what it's like as an independent artist when you've got all these people who are sending you emails or getting in contact and saying, I can do this for you, I can do that for you, I can take you to the moon. How much can you really trust this? Who is reliable? Who is worth outsourcing to? Who is not? So yeah, I feel that this interview with Dolly is one of these episodes where I've really taken a significant step forward in terms of crystallizing this idea of the podcast. That yes, for someone who is a fan of Dolly Dagger, you can discover this and go, oh, great, it's an interview with Dolly Dagger. I want to learn more about her. And you absolutely will. But it's also an opportunity to learn about what it's like for an independent artist out there. And yeah, that's whatever comes next. So if you would like to follow me on social media, you can do so at Tom Osmond Sounds. I also have the Substack that I mentioned, tomosmond.substack.com. And I also make music or strange sounds with spoken word over the top of them as well. And I didn't mention that before, but that's also tied to the book idea. So Michael Crawley had his marathon that he wanted to run under a certain time. My ambition is that I want to go to Chicago and I want to record with Steve Albini. And so the book idea is partly that that's going to be my personal quest. That kind of is my personal quest. And in amongst all of that, as I investigate this world, I'm investigating it because I'm interested and because I think it's insightful for other people, but I'm also partly investigating it for myself. So I have a website for my own creative music related or sound related projects, which is tomosmondsounds.com. And what else is there? There are probably other things that I've forgotten, but yeah, if you listen to the episodes on Spotify, I would be very grateful if you would give a positive rating. That would help the appearance of the podcast and help me to book more guests in the future. If you want to go to Substack, you can read other articles that I've written over the past couple of years, as well as listening to all the podcast episodes. As I say, tomosmond.substack.com. If you would like to subscribe there, that would also be great too. And aside from that, I would say, yeah, check out Ghost Cult Magazine, check out New Noise Magazine, check out Blessed Altar Zine. Um, and I guess now there's nothing left for me to say, but yeah, here's Dolly Dagger. Now, funny thing is, I think we actually, by sheer coincidence, have a number of different things in common. Are you originally from Melbourne?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, me too.
In Australia.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah.
Which suburb?
Surrey Hills.
Oh, no way. The other side. I'm from Sunbury, so I'm like Macedon West Side.
And
Incredible. When were you, when did you leave to go to Britain?
I've moved back. I moved back and forth, but the last time I lived in Australia was when I was. I left Australia for the last time when I was 8. So,
Okay. Hmm.
so it's been a long time. I mean, that was actually something I wanted to ask you about. So when did you move to LA and why did you move to LA?
Mm, I moved in 2015,
Mm,
um, but it was quite back and forth for a while of visiting, dipping my toes, figuring it out, and then committing. And then I got quite deep into my project here, and then we got hit with the pandemic. So there was that. Um, but I left because I had a band in Australia. We were kids. It was great. We had such a good time. But then everybody grew up and wanted to travel with their partners and do the adult thing. And I did not. And that band dissipated, which was sad because we were doing really well. So I was quite upset about it. But I knew I didn't want to stop doing music professionally, or having a go at it. And so I had come over here a couple of times to visit, and something struck me. I think anyone that's been to LA, you either love it or you hate it.
Mm.
And I loved it immediately. So I felt like it was the place for me to be musically, and I haven't been wrong yet. So
And it's clear from just, learning a bit about you and following you a bit on social media, you are spinning a lot of different plates. So it's
and
not just the performance side of things, it's the writing, it's the recording, it's the video making. I think your activity on social media is really interesting, and I want to get into that as well. But going back just briefly to when you were in Australia, when you started making music, what were you starting out doing, and how did that evolve to where you're at now as Dolly Dagger?
it's cute, really. Occasionally, I look back and see videos of us performing on stage. It was very pop punk. I think we thought we weren't trying to be the next Paramore, but we very much were. So when you look back at it like that, they were the biggest band in our ethos at the time. So it was hard to not obviously be um, likened to them anyway. Anyone that spoke to us about it, that was the top one. It still happens today too. You get an alternative female fronted band, and immediately everyone jumps to Paramore because that's the biggest marker that they have, which isn't a bad thing in my eyes, but it's lazy, because there's many, many other bands that I feel like our music is derived from. But at the time, I do recall it being extremely pop punk, really just fun. I think it was, youth, misplaced youth, really, just very us figuring it out and having a really good time. But it definitely evolved in the sense of me realizing that essentially I need to, forge my own ground, in a sense of not trying to be another band or not trying to be what was kind of hot at the time. And I love pop punk and I love emo and I grew up on all of it. But
Mm.
when I write, that's not what naturally falls out of me. And I think we're all capable as musicians to write any kind of genre because that's music. Music is music. Um, but when you figure out your voice and what you actually naturally tend to put out and what feels right to you, that's changing. It's career changing and life changing once you land and feel comfortable and confident about what you're doing instead of having to try to look for markers and cues from other people.
And did you start out both singing and playing guitar, or did one come before the other?
I started singing first, and then I started playing guitar when I was like 14, I think. And they just went hand in hand. But in my other band, I didn't play guitar, only to write, and to maybe play acoustic occasionally. But we had two guitarists, so I didn't really do that until I had moved on to doing my own thing. And then I needed to because I didn't have any other members. So,
And as Dolly Dagger, and I think having listened to what you've released at the moment, so I think let's see if I can remember this off the top of my head. There were two singles in 2021, and then there
yeah.
was the My Way cover, the Limp Bizkit, not the Frank Sinatra Limp Bizkit,
Damn it, you heard that?
2022. Here's the thing. I saw some comment from you where you were like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to feel about this. I think it's great. I really like it.
Okay.
And one of the things I particularly like about that is the in the chorus,
Mhm.
you, I think, have just created a different vocal melody because,
Yeah.
Fred Durst like does his thing, but you've actually created a really cool vocal melody, which really gets stuck in my head. So I
Well,
think it's cool. I don't think you
thank
have
you very
anything to
much.
regret about that.
Okay, I've considered taking it down, but I will leave it there. So thank you.
I think it's very cool. And then you've got the Nightmare EP, which
Yes,
came out last year.
yes.
And now you've got Tower, which is
Hmm.
going to be coming out April the 10th.
Well, yep. Hmm.
So I think, like, clearly with Tower,
Yeah,
uh, one of the things that stands out is you've got this really impressive drumming on it, very powerful drumming.
it is incredible.
But I think in some of your previous tracks, like for example on My Way, I think you've got programmed drums.
Yes, correct.
So how has the lineup of the Dolly Dagger band changed from 2021 to now?
Yes. Okay, so I think a lot of the time we end up hiring a drummer, a professional studio drummer, to track whatever Jesse and I come up with. And a lot of the time, it is Jesse programming something to go along with whatever riff he's playing. Um, and those get developed after the song is really written, really. So I think this session with Louis writing Tower, he drummed on it in the room with us. And I've noticed this at rehearsal too. We haven't kind of revolving door of drummers. We had a main one that is usually with us, but he'd moved back to his home state, so he's not really around. But when we are in the room, I tend to hear other elements of the song that could have been there, especially things that are already released. And I think, oh God, it would have been great to have heard that in my head if we had been in the room with a drummer working on the fly like that, as opposed to, oh, let's quickly just pop something in to go along with the guitars, and it's not exactly dictating how the song should go. But in retrospect, hearing them again in rehearsal and having the time to kind of fluff about with them does present new opportunity and new roads to go down. And so I have suggested in the current timeline of having worked with Louis and seeing how that's played out in a strong way where it's actually changed how we write because of that influence, because there's somebody else there saying, what if we did this and it stopped? Or what if we did this and it was very impactful? It
Mm.
changes the dynamic of the song so much that I think in a positive way, moving forward, we'll likely be in the room with a drummer before tracking instead of getting a rough demo together and sending it off to a drummer to track and send it back to us. I think us working a little more closely, like as a duo, and kind of, a loose duo in some ways as well. Jesse is my co-writer and my bandmate, but at the end of the day, he's got a whole career and a whole life. So I kind of end up driving forward, and sometimes he's not around, sometimes it just changes from time to time. So having a drummer with us, I think, would just change the dynamic a little bit in a positive way, because we've experienced so much goodness come out of being with Louis in the room and having a drummer in the room with that mindset.
So just to clarify, this guitarist this is Jesse McInturf you're talking about,
Yeah, that's right, Jesse.
and it's Louis Diller.
Louis Diller, yeah, he's the producer and co-writer for this track.
So he's a producer, co-writer of Tower, and he's also the drummer. Is that right?
Yeah, we all went in a room together, and it just honestly magic. It's so cliche, I know, but it just turned on really quickly. Jesse had a great riff. Louis is a drummer, so it came very quickly to him. He was punching away. It was really fun to watch him work because he was punching away programmed. And he did program everything in to begin with, because it's just for speed and time. We're not setting up a full kit. And then it was later on, like our third session, that he ended up actually tracking the drums.
So how much for that track were you actually writing it as you were in the rehearsal studio together? What was actually already fully formed before that?
Only the riff for the chorus. Well, yeah, only the main riff. It's the one that I call it the Lady Gaga riff. It sounds similar to a Lady Gaga song. But that was the one thing we had. That was it. Jesse had sent it to me previously to the session, which does occasionally happen. Like there's always some loose idea floating around, whether it's from us or the producer or the other writers. And this was one riff out of a few that we were taking in. Occasionally, maybe even Louis had presented a couple of tracks to us that he had written previously that we could use, which sometimes that is how they go down as well. But he loved the riff. I personally didn't hear it right away. I was like, it's not for me. I don't love it. It's really heavy
Yep.
compared to what we normally do.
Mm.
But they were having so much fun. I didn't want to be a dampener on that. So I let it go. I was like, let's see, I'll give it a couple of hours. We'll see where it ends up. And within a couple of hours, I was enamored. That was it. I was like, yep, we're doing this. This is good.
Well, to your point, what I think you mentioned earlier about um, maybe you were referring to the band you had before, Dolly Dagger. You were saying that people kept comparing you to Paramore, but that there were a variety of different influences. So, listening to the tracks that you've put out as Dolly Dagger, I hear a variety of different influences, and I think I always show my age when I'm interviewing people who are a bit younger than me because my references tend to come from the 90s.
That's
Um,
okay. We all grew up on the 90s, I think.
So, I mean, I guess this is kind of going over into the 2000s, but I do hear a bit of Deftones,
Oh,
um,
you're my
it-
hero. I love that.
which I think is a great reference point to have. Like, they've got such a cool guitar tone, and I think another thing that they've got, which I get from your music too, is there is that heaviness, but it's not at the expense of a kind of a catchiness too. Like they know how to have a pop sensibility. Like I guess they're sort of influenced by a lot of sort of shoegaze and electronic music, and so I find that's quite a cool combination.
Absolutely. I don't know. I think it's relatively well known amongst my friends that Deftones is my number one favorite band of all time. So
Ah,
I think that knowing it comes through a little to someone that didn't know that is really nice. It's easy for people to hear it when they know that I love them, but I think it's funny because it doesn't come through in the way that I want it to. I want to sound more like the Deftones,
mm,
but it's just not. It's just not what comes out. So that's great. I think we all aspire to replicate our heroes in some capacity. But when it doesn't work out is when it's great. When you have someone that does sound exactly like the bands of the past, to me, it's like, well, okay, we already have this. Um, that's
yeah.
good. Just what do you do though? So I'm glad that I just it happens the way it happens for me, and it comes out how it comes out, and it's an inkling of it rather than a full, cover band version of originals, right? So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I do love Deftones. Kind of, they're up there with Paramore. I can't say that they're not that Paramore's still not my number one, but they they're both up there.
Well, another thing that I picked up on as well, which was particularly from, I think the first single actually, Break and Bend, I
Hmm.
thought, oh, I think I hear a bit of Smashing Pumpkins. And
Oh yeah,
then
absolutely.
I like how on Spotify you've got a couple of playlists that you've made. So I'd actually listened to all of the tracks, and then I went, "Oh, here's a playlist that she's got of the things that inspired her." And I think the first
Yeah,
track was Cherub Rock by Smashing Pumpkins. I went, "Aha,
yeah.
I was onto something here."
You were onto it. Yeah, definitely. It's hard to escape. I think those riffs and melodies that just transcend a time. They'll always find you. If you go to Australia and put on the rock station, that's it. That's what we play. Smashing Pumpkins. I remember hearing them as a kid. Placebo. I don't think Australia has let go of the 90s. I don't think they ever will, I always laugh because I do recall being like a little behind uh, back in the day, like at school. There were things that we didn't have until much later. Having lived here and seeing things in the ethos and just general pop culture, seeing things that like Sunny D or these drinks and candies and chips, and then realizing, oh, this is basically someone came to America probably in the 80s, 90s and found all these products and then started making them in Australia. We have very similar names of shopping stores like supermarkets, and it's like Target. They're not owned by Target US, but somebody obviously came here, saw it work, took it home. But how many years later, after it's successful in America, that we get it? So I just think we have, you know, a penchant for hanging on to or finding these things at that time when I was a kid. Now, obviously, with the internet, where we're fully up to date. My
Mm.
music comes out in Australia before it comes out anywhere else because it's the first time zone. So
Oh
now
yeah.
it's now we get we're a little ahead, which is funny. Film premieres, things like that. But I do recall back in the day being a little behind.
And when you did move over to LA, thinking about, rock radio stations and other sort of things that were around you,
Mm.
was there much of a change for you? Did you really notice that things were different?
Yeah, I think everything's a little harder to get to in some capacity. Where what I like about that though is that people are very, very bluntly honest here. They'll say, no, you don't have enough of this, this, and that. Whereas in other places, other territories, I feel like you don't get really the explanation. You get the snub or the no reply, or occasionally you'll be like, oh, you know, try again next time, come back to me another day. But here they just basically say, oh, you know, good job, but no, you don't have enough. We're not ready to cover you yet. Do some more work and come back. And here are some of the points you should touch on. I feel like there's a sense of people wanting to help you or wanting
Mm.
to give you the tools to use to get where you're trying to go, rather than just let's, you know, you go back over there and then we'll let you in when we feel like it, type of thing. It just feels like there is a huge sense of, especially now, a huge sense of community. We're facing major changes in the music industry across the board. I think everyone's feeling that in so many ways. It's interesting to watch. I'm seeing a lot of people being laid off from major companies. Major labels are struggling to, you know, retain workers, and all of these skilled people are now on the market in an independent fashion. So I think we're probably about to see like the renaissance of indie labels and indie services.
Well, that word that you just mentioned there, community, was something that I wanted to bring up before, and I was thinking about it in terms of the social media. So particularly with your Instagram account. So it makes me feel like a little bit of a stalker because once it was decided we were going to do this interview, I went, all right, let's do a little bit of looking back.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time. It's
Well,
nice.
your Instagram is great for this because it comes across like it's not just that you're posting pictures, but it's actually like a sort of a blog, really. A lot of your pictures, they come with a story. So it's actually really cool going back through and you have pictures of concerts and you'll be talking about the people that you worked with. And then you'll have little videos where you're doing some sort of promo for a video, for a song, and you've got a little story about that as well. So you can really kind of go through the history of the band, and as you as a performer. And I wonder how much of that and sort of building that community of an audience was conscious and how much did that just sort of come together by happy coincidence?
It's funny because I try to be mysterious. I really try to be that cool girl that just writes one word or a short cryptic message. And I do think about it often because I grew up on artists like that. And I remember the wanting to dig further and wanting to find out more because it wasn't readily given to you unless you're reading an interview. Um, and I fail. I'm not good at it. I have words to say. I always want to thank people I work with too. So if there's a show or there's something happening, I want to blast everybody that was a part of it or had something to do with it, or the supporters as well. I can't not. And that's not to say that when that doesn't happen, that's wrong. It's just that's my form of communication, is to write and to use my words. And I think it's just something I always have done in terms of writing. When it comes down to it, like poetry is the first thing I think we all discover as kids. We're taught to, you know, write a little rhyme, or we're taught about rhyming, or we all kind of have a little project at school, write this little ditty or write something that's a poem. And that just kind of is where I began. And I think it's where we all start to learn like small nursery rhymes and small songs and limericks. And I can't not explain the photo. Occasionally, I will just dump an emoji and leave if I don't have time. But a lot of the time, I do want to have an explanation. I do want to have something to say or give context, even
Mm.
as to what I'm posting about. And I don't think it hurts the algorithm to use words because you're helping it discover exactly what it is that you're representing at the what you're bringing to the table for that particular post. And Instagram seems to like that a little bit as well. So, half of it is a strategic in my mind. I know that it's better if I write something, but I can't stop myself from doing it anyway. Even if I try to not write something and be just a cool, calm person, I still have to put some words in there somewhere.
And in terms of building up an audience and building up a sort of a musical community and a fan base, obviously we're living in this age now where social media and the internet is a huge part of things, and streaming services as well. But it's clear that you're also focused on playing live and actually going and connecting with people directly. So in terms of the time and the energy and the money that you're going to invest in these things, how do you view the value, the balance of the value between going out, doing shows, touring versus the online social media side of things?
Mm. It's it's funny. They're very different places, and I've been lucky enough to have a taste of both. Obviously, I've perpetually been online since I was born, really. It's just part of my nature. I was always curious about the internet, regardless. So I've been on since the MySpace days, or the end of the MySpace days, I should say. And I can't live without it in that sense. I feel a part of the community. Like it comforts me in a way. Where if I'm feeling like, oh, I want to connect with people, but I don't want to leave my house right now, I'm going to jump online. I see what my friends are up to. There's conversation, there's back and forth. When someone's sad. You can gauge now your response from friends if they're doing well or not, as to how much they're posting. And it is the highlight reel, but at some times too, like I've been made aware that someone's not doing well because they're not posting online. So we have developed a new, I guess, system for our emotional behavior as humans and to read each other through text or through this online medium. But it's amazing for that fact because there are so many people online. It's also a detrimental place because everyone can give you an opinion. So
Mm.
I luckily haven't been blasted. They say if you're not getting hate, you're not doing well enough. So maybe I need to
Maybe
try
that's to come.
harder. But once that comes, like I've had a few things here and there, stalkers, a few weird situations. They're strange. That's why I change my name pretty regularly on like Facebook and family things like that, because I had quickly realized that my last name being on the internet leads to my family, and then that leads to people bugging my mom or bugging my brother, and that's weird, like for what? For no reason. So there's the strangeness of that. But there's the strangeness of that in real life. We go out and you might be at a huge concert in a huge venue, and you run into some strange human that wants to do something weird or be weird. And I mean aggressive, or,
Mm.
in some ways, as women especially. I won't go further than that, but I'm sure people can figure out what I mean. So I think there's the good and the bad of all of that. But the people that I meet in real life, I don't feel uh, people will turn around and say that it's a better connection or it's a deeper connection or it's superior to having a connection online. Um, I think that's detrimental to the people that can't go out. Like it's ableist behavior to assume that the people you're going to meet in real life are a better connection that you're going to meet on the internet. So I value the people I meet online and the people that message me. There are regulars that jump in and they respond to every post, every story with words of encouragement,
Mm.
with praise, how much they love something or that they want to hear something or that they can't wait for it. That it's beautiful. I've never met them in real life. Maybe I never will. They're very sweet. They want to come to shows, but I'm not playing in their city. So I think those relationships are just as beautiful as the ones that I meet face to face. But those face to face ones do exist as well. So it's just a benefit in both lanes, whether you're living online or living in real life out at a venue or playing a show and meeting new people. A lot of the time playing in LA, it's similar people most of the time. Someone that you know will bring a friend that's never heard you before, or there will be new faces and you're playing with new bands and you're meeting their fans too. So that is great. But I think also leaving town and playing outside of your base is where I have seen the most enthusiastic fans in terms of people that really are, they are just there to enjoy some music. They're really out because it's a smaller city. LA is such a big city, something on all the time. At some point, I start to see people looking like, oh, I just have to go to this show. Just have to show up to this and be at this thing. And there isn't the raging enthusiasm because there was nothing else to do that night. And I think the smaller towns or rural areas and places outside of the city are hungry for new music and hungry for bands. And that's a beautiful thing. But getting on the road is another story. And that's something I'm working towards.
Of course, you've got the connection to Australia because you're originally from there. So, and you were playing there before. So, on the one hand, if you look at you being an LA artist and you go, "Oh, she's touring in Australia," it feels like you're going all over the place. But I guess in a sense, that's kind of like going home.
Yeah.
So, aside from sort of what was previously your local locations in Australia and LA, how far have you gone with Dolly Dagger in terms of playing?
Yeah, great question. I actually haven't really played outside of LA as Dolly Dagger. I have with my project before, Doctrine, which is honestly still Dolly Dagger. In some way, it's still me, it's still my music, and I put it out. But through the pandemic, um, there was a really big company called Doctrine that got extremely huge based on medical supply and online telehealth, and it absolutely killed my name. It same spelling, everything. It SEO blown out of the water. So I was struggling really hard with the name, and everyone would put Dolly on a flyer. Every time I had a show, they'd put Dolly and my last name. And I'm like, guys, my band name is Doctrine. Like it's everywhere. You can't miss it. But they remembered Dolly. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to flip this. This isn't working out. Pandemic's happening when no one's doing anything anyway. Everything was falling by the wayside for a lot of people. And I just saw that as the best time for me to kind of flip it up. I thought, now or never, this is going to be it. I still play some Doctrine songs, but that's the band that I had toured with, and I'd done the full West Coast of the US.
Hmm.
Um, and in Australia, in my previous band, Cooper Street, we toured the whole country apart from Perth. Poor Perth misses out on everything, but we had toured the whole country in Perth. So, and then I did go out on the road with a friend's band as a assistant kind of TM in some capacity, like merch and stuff like that. So I've had the taste of being on the road and doing the kind of bigger club gigs as part of the crew. And the taste of that was extremely good for me. It was very motivating. It was really great to see people and to learn, just to see how people are interacting post pandemic, to see
Mm.
how shows are going down on that kind of level. It was really fun and really, really fun to see the fans so hungry for new music, like watching a band they've never seen before and then loving them and coming up and buying their merch and being enamored by them. So I'm looking forward to getting out of LA a little bit in the future. We play here quite often. Well, I feels like often to me, but I'd love to. We've had some people ask for like San Diego and things just a little outside of LA. So I think that'll be stop number one. But the main thing is touring just costs a ton of money. It's
Yeah.
so much to get everybody on the road. we are a small outfit anyway, so it is a little cheaper in that regard, but we don't have a label or management in that way. So we have to get some capital to get on the road, and if we can do that, then I would gladly live in the van for a very long period of time.
I mean, I think this, that statement about touring being expensive is an important insight for people that don't have that firsthand knowledge of the expenses of trying to operate as an independent band. So maybe you
Yeah.
could say a bit about what what are the costs? What are the logistics of touring and playing for you as Dolly Dagger?
Yeah, I mean, accommodation, transportation, paying for somebody to come on the road and play drums. I think Jesse and I are both happy to do everything ourselves as much as we can. Um, we would love to obviously have a sound engineer on the road. Not a lot of bands get that at our level. So you do end up with house engineer, but that's another cost if you're doing some club gigs and you want to take someone, as well as advertising. So you want to sell the tickets, you kind of need to make sure people know about its existence. So advertising and marketing and promotion, as well as just the logistical costs of being on the road. So you're basically on vacation in a way where you don't have a kitchen, you don't have. I mean, you're living on protein bars and bananas and Starbucks and whatever coffee you can get your hands on. So you do end up spending a little bit on the road as well in that capacity because you just have to get what is available to you. And, we would steal, well, not steal, but we were given riders for all the shows. We'd take everything at the end, clear out the green room. Thank you. We add to the collection. But at some point, you get sick of the protein bars and you get sick of the Red Bull and the whatever else they give you. So there's a lot of cost that goes into it. And that's for a small band. But then you look at some of these bigger bands with full, semi trucks worth of gas and people to pay. And yeah, it's a huge cost. I mean, it's all relative when it comes to the ticket sales versus the cost of that, where it's, say, a huge touring artist and they're obviously making a lot in ticket sales. And then you've got merch cuts and all those types of things. So the things that you can make money on as a band, a lot of venues are taking merch cuts. So therefore, it's like your merchandise is then being doxed or taxed a little bit from venues. Luckily, the smaller bands generally, as a support, aren't being taken from as much as the bigger headliners, but it does still exist. There are some venues that will strong arm you into handing over the cut. Some of them will waive it and say, no worries, you didn't make a lot, we won't take it from you. But all of these things exist. I think it's just evident that everyone's struggling to make money in the industry, that if
Mm.
they have to start digging into our merch, yeah, we're in trouble. The industry's in trouble, but it's hanging on by a thread and it's still going, and there's still some really incredible, successful tours. But, I've seen somebody coin the statement that, we're traveling t-shirt salesmen at this point is our main gig. So
I do have that sense these days that t-shirt sales are really important part of like a revenue stream for bands. I guess kind of at any level, really.
that's all we've got. We'd give everything else away for free. It's free to watch a music video. It's free to listen to the music. You pay $10 a month to Spotify or Tidal or whoever you use. We get a small percentage of that.
Yeah,
The only hard thing we have to sell is our merch.
yeah.
So that's generally, yeah, where we tend to have the best chance of making a little money as an independent band.
I feel like there is an inherent problem, sort of like a psychological problem, for an audience in terms of this subscription model of streaming services. In that, like you say, if someone does pay the $10 a month for Spotify, it gives
Yeah,
that feeling of, oh yeah, I'm paying for this. I'm supporting. I'm paying for the music. But
yeah,
as a lot of people know, anybody who's making music knows what you actually get at the end of that is such a tiny, tiny fraction of any
yeah,
amount of money that people are actually paying, unless you're the Ed Sheerans and the Beyoncés of this
yeah.
world.
Absolutely. And any label artists are getting priority because every major label has a stake in Spotify. I have lots of feelings about it, but at the same token, I try to not get too in the weeds with it, because we do have really excellent platforms like Bandcamp and any other kind of capacity that to sell. I don't do Patreon, but a lot of bands do Patreon, and offer subscription models, and that type of thing tends to work. I personally love the selling merch in person. I don't mind the traveling t-shirt thing. I like having all of that set up, and I like creating the merch, designing it, putting it out, working with people on it. I think it's cute. So I'm not mad at that element, or that that's how I can make money. But it is sad just to kind of see so many bands struggling. Like every day I open up social media and I see somebody, oh, this is going to be our last tour as a band. We're not doing this anymore. Or, hey, all of these people just got fired at this major publication, or all of these people just got let go at this major label. It's like, what are we doing? At some point, we need to figure out how this works best for everybody. But I'm not sure they want it to. And when I say they, I mean like the people that make the biggest amount of money. There are so many independent labels that care, that are doing really great work, that are trying to get their artists where they're going, and just they're in it for the music. But then there's this commodified version of it as well. And they eat everything up. They buy everything. They buy small labels. They buy people out. They take artists and shelve them so that they're off the market, so that the competition is less for the bands that they're trying to push. Yeah, I see it in a way. We're getting a lot of the commodified music is so big. Like, how do we have billion-dollar artists? We have like the 1% of artists, and then the rest of us are struggling. Even the big bands that we think are huge, that are doing so well, they're not. They're struggling. They have day jobs. You see it here in LA. Some of the members of these bands, they're working other jobs because they have to. So at what point, you know?
Yeah, that was a sort of, I don't know if it happened all in one moment. I think it happened over time for me. But as I started to discover that various bands that I thought of as being established bands and thought
Mm.
like, oh, this is their career, realizing, oh, they like have full-time jobs elsewhere and they're fitting in the music and they're trying to make enough money to be able to do the music where they can. It was a bit of a revelation for me to go, oh, this is not far from being like something that you can easily do as a career.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people from Australia have, in the earlier days of me moving here, bought things up like that. The perception is that I'm rich, and that I live in LA, and that I'm doing the lavish thing. And so far from the truth. The perception was, oh, you're on iTunes? Damn, you must be successful and signed and all of these things. And explaining to someone, I pay to be on iTunes. I pay iTunes to hold my music. It's not a sign of success to be on these platforms. Like, anyone can be on there. Is that a good thing? I don't know. Whether or not, like, the screening process of music, like, have we saturated the market entirely? There are people taking advantage of the streaming services, like uploading silence or uploading AI music that is just, house music that is on a playlist and gets played over and over again. So there are people that are just trying to make money, as well. But you do see that everywhere. Then you've got the streaming playlist services, like, I'll pitch your song if you give me $20, or all of these things that have come out of it, right? Everyone's just trying to make money from
Mm,
artists and from art.
yeah.
So that's the thing. We're paying for business, and business is doing very well when it comes to people offering services to artists, like distribution, pitching, all of these services that we need, apparently. Um, the value I find is my publicist and whatever I decide to pay for and what I can afford to pay for in marketing.
Mm.
And I've learned a little bit of social media marketing as much as I've had to. And sometimes I get somebody else to do it, but they're the kind of avenues that I see are worth it. Paying for some of these other services, I think a lot of artists fall into those traps because it sounds good and it sounds like it's going to help you, but it doesn't.
Yeah.
Um, but I feel like we get preyed on a little bit too. We get a lot of young artists I still get preyed on. I'm not a big artist. I'm still a smaller artist, but I get emails on top of emails daily about how somebody can do this thing for me that's going to take me to the moon. And I know very well that it won't, but some people will buy into that and they'll see the headline and they'll see the subject, I can get you this, and then they will pay somebody an exorbitant amount of money. Some of these companies are charging $500 for a pitch or something like just insane to me that it isn't going to, you'd be better off putting that money into merch and then finding your fans and going out and playing the show and selling it to them. Like all of that stuff online is just garbage.
So I wanted to get into, I think, very, very interesting insight from you in terms of, being an independent DIY kind of grassroots level of artist and the different elements of the music world and the music business that you are involved with, and you kind of have to really be careful about in terms of what you're going to do yourself, what you're going to pay for other people to do, who you're going to get involved.
Mm.
And I wanted to ask you about something. So this is where we have another little interesting connection in common
Okay.
via one person who speaks very highly of you. So I
Oh,
wanted to
okay.
ask you about your working relationship with Jack Rogers.
Jack. I love Jack so much. He's an absolute legend. Oh wow, what a guy. I saw Jack's work on Instagram, so thank you to the algorithm. Um, I loved it immediately, just right away. Who doesn't? I think you see that, and it speaks to people. Obviously, evidently, he's working with everybody. I honestly thought it can be hit and miss sometimes. Depends on the market, who you're talking to, what you're asking. But I thought, he's working with these huge bands, like he might not be prioritizing smaller jobs. Um, let's see anyway. So I shoot off an email and he's stoked. So great. I'm like, all right, let's do it. I'm so in for this. Like I love it. It's so worth it to me. You know, investing in that type of thing because I'm helping another independent artist, regardless of the fact that they're working with everybody. You still bread and butter for everyone is this art that we do, what we create and what we put out. And I love doing that. I want to pay people. I try to whip up cool things on my own. But again, like you've already mentioned, I wear many hats. And somebody once said to me, why don't you put a few things on the shelf? Is it worth you sitting in front of Photoshop for hours on end, struggling to get something out when it's not your primary medium of creativity? Pay somebody to do the design of the shirt, pay somebody to do that. And these are all costs again that add up, right? So we have to pay for the design, then we have to pay for the print, then we have to do all these things. But this is the life we chose. So at some point, I get super smart about what I'm spending my money on. And as soon as I saw Jack's work, I'm like, what is it? Give it to me. I need this. It's so incredible. He was an absolute pleasure to work with. He's such a sweet human. I really wanted to respect his work. He asked for some references, and I really like that he asked me to reference his own work. And it actually inspired me as well to go on in the future after that. When I'm doing references for our work and songs, I don't reference any other bands anymore. I reference our previous tracks and I say, okay, we want to do a little something when it comes to a mix. We've been working with the same mix engineer for a while, but I'll say, let's go in the same direction as Sick, or let's go in the same direction as Swerve, or something from the EP, because he knows what that is. That was his work and it was our work. And we're not going, oh, we want to sound like the Deftones, or we want you to mix in the style of this or that. No, we want to stick to what we're doing. And I loved that Jack asked me to reference his own catalog
Hmm.
because that's what drew me in the first place. So it made it very easy for me to shoot off a couple assets. There was one photo of me and a photo of the alien head. and the rest was gravy. It was all him. I just said, look, these are things I love. These are things that resonate to me because of the song. Here are some lyrics, and here are the designs of yours that I love. And I had like 10 to begin with. And then I narrowed it down to like 4 because I know it's overwhelming when you're like, wait, what do you mean all of this? No, I can only do a little bit. So I send off all of the package. The first draft, that was it. It was, he just landed on the money right away. So really, really love Jack. He's a sweet, sweet, sweet human. And I really hope that he carries on. I'm going to see him doing all of the every single piece of merch in the future for every band.
Yeah, he's an absolutely lovely individual. I my contact with him started because I interviewed him for an American magazine called New Noise Magazine. And just to be
Yeah,
clear to anyone who's listening, this is Get a Real Job Kid, Jack Rogers.
yeah,
And so I learned quite a lot about what he's done and who he's worked with and how he works.
yeah,
And then a few weeks ago, I decided that I wanted to expand the podcast onto different platforms. And I thought, okay, I really need to invest in having some professional logos and banners and these types of things. And I thought, I'm
yeah.
going to go to Jack. Yeah. So I just thought that was a funny connection. But
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. It's such a wonderful connection. And his love for art and his process, I think, is what I respect the most. You know, he does his thing his way. Um, that's hard to find. You know, people that are just true to who they are and what they do. And having that, please reference my own catalog.
yeah.
Just yeah, I mean that's pure creativity right there. Talent.
And I definitely feel with him, and he, I guess, as you're well aware, also is in a band as well, and he makes his own music. I feel like he really understands what it is to be like an
Yeah,
independent artist, and he's very, very fair in terms of what he will ask
yeah,
for in doing a commission, and then he'll basically give
yeah,
you these designs. And so I guess you worked with him for the Nightmare EP, right? So,
yeah.
and he has also done some designs that you've used for merch, is that correct?
Yeah, so it started out with the merch design and it was just for the t-shirt. And he had done, I guess, like the logo in some capacity where it was my name and the font and then Nightmare and a few other like barbed wire, I think it was, in the design on the shirt. And so we landed on that and that was done. And I sent it off for print. And then as we were doing the front cover, I had that same photo that's on the shirt of me with like the demon eyes rolled back. And I thought, what if it was kind of, I think, like a Fiona Apple record where it's just like right in her face. And I thought, oh, that's cool. That's super confronting. Um, what if I did something like that? Because we're always obviously looking for artwork and we need artwork pretty consistently. I've had people design front covers for singles in the past, as well as t-shirt designs. But on this one, I thought, okay, I have this incredible photograph that my friend Kim took, and she does a lot of our promo shots. So Kim Peterson, just absolutely wonderful photographer. And I asked her, do you mind if I use this as a record cover? You know, because occasionally you can run into asking somebody for a design or something, but it comes with a caveat of you can only do this or you can't use it for that, or please ask me for permission to use it for XYZ. And so I got permission from her to use it for the front cover. And I thought it needs the name on the front. And so then I just hit up Jack a few weeks after having finished the project and said, do you mind if I cut out, like you don't need to do any extra work, but can I cut out this little piece of the t-shirt design and stick it on the record? And he was like, yeah, go ahead, please. So he was just very humble and sweet. And you can run into situations where someone will say, oh, I prefer that you don't, or no, I don't need to do that. So it was very sweet of him to allow us to do that.
And sticking to the visual side of things, but one other aspect of the band and of your multiple hats, which I definitely need to ask you about, is the music videos. Because you've got
Yeah.
some great fun music videos that you've done, and I have the impression that you're very actively involved and have been actively involved with all of them. So maybe you could say a bit about the video side of Dolly Dagger.
Yeah, absolutely. that is my other calling, I think. It's always been maybe stemming from those moments when you're in the back of the car as a kid and there's some song on the radio and you're into it and you're staring out pretending you're in a music video. I think I've always felt and done that. Uh, and it just pops in my mind really from the get-go of the song. Like once we're really into a song and it's developed and I know what it's about and the words are coming together, I start seeing visuals pretty quickly. And I think that happens for a lot of artists. Some of them don't take the time to get into that. Some of them don't have time to get into that, which is totally fair. And there's incredible directors and people out there that they can hire. For me, it stemmed really from one, loving it, but two, keeping costs down. Obviously, as an indie, we're trying to find ways to save as much money as possible. So I've learned a lot of things so I can save money. And directing was one of them because I did end up working with people and learning and seeing the process and understanding it, and working with DPs as well, and then understanding camera and understanding the technical elements that I should know as a director. So after all of those and having worked with other directors on my own work, I did just kind of say to myself, I can do this. I can do this on my own. I'm not going to hire a director. I know what I need to do. Even from our first music video in our first band, we storyboarded the entire thing shot for shot. The director came in. I didn't realize until after the fact, we'd basically done his job. We made
Mm.
life so easy because we did the whole storyboard and then he just went really shot for shot exactly what was on the storyboard. I'm like, you're halfway there if you're doing that. If you're storyboarding and seeing that, you are halfway there to be able to create your own piece of work. And I think telling the story is so much visual as it is audio. And we grew up on music videos. I love them. I watch every one that comes out as soon as I pop open YouTube and whatever's in front of me, and then I start going down a rabbit hole of watching everyone's music videos because I love seeing the creativity, how people work. I love seeing new ideas and cool tricks and oh, what they do there with that camera, that was incredible. That looked amazing. Um, and I think it helps set the tone, especially for an artist when you're told so much of your success really rides on having a story or having some ways for people to connect with you. And I think that's the best way for people to connect with me is to be able to show who I am and what it is about this song. I don't know what it happened with Tower. I bought the track home, I put it on, and for whatever reason, I saw Jesse on top of the tower with a dragon and fire, and he was shredding. And I think it was just that guitar solo that really triggered that imagery in my mind, of seeing him, cameras flying around. Like we don't have that kind of a budget to pull something like that off. So we did what we have in the video, and it's there. But I'd love to just do a full film production of a music video. I do miss the days of these, $90,000, $100,000 music videos that we were getting from rock bands, and we tend to not get that as much anymore. I do miss that a little bit, but that was the golden age of music where everyone was making lots of money, so it was
Yeah.
a little bit different. But
Something just popped into my head, and I don't think you've done this, but correct me if I'm wrong. And I'm wondering if you would be interested in doing this. I really like it when bands do a kind of like a tour diary, and you get that sort of
mm,
camcorder thing of following the band and going to the shows. And because you already have that sort of aspect of bringing people into what's going on via Instagram, is that
yeah.
something that you've thought about doing?
Absolutely. And I do try to film as much behind the scenes as possible. And I always intend as well to film more, but then we get to shoot day. And because I am wearing so many hats, it's something that just tends to fall by the wayside. But I do need to start. It's just a budget thing, really. Like having somebody on set to do that or having somebody follow you around costs money. I mean,
Yeah.
occasionally you'll find a friend and somebody wants to do it. I hate asking for things for free. I
Mm.
don't enjoy it. If I have to, or if I can ask for a cheaper price, then I'll ask for a good deal. But I will never tend to like make somebody do something for free. So it's just another cost thing. I mean, I would absolutely love to have somebody follow me all day, every day, and show everybody what it is that goes on. Half of it would be sitting in front of a computer reading emails, but I could make it look cool, figure out a way to make it look fun. But and I do see that occasionally you watch like a documentary and someone's completely dramatizing reading an email, and you're like, reading an email, calm down. But they're making it look like this huge deal. I would love that so much, but you need to be on the road and you need to have the people to be there with you.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that doubles down. Like when I was doing merch for my friend's band, I was filming everything as well. So it does
Mm.
come with, I think, other roles. So when you do have everyone is filming behind the scenes, but the very purposeful, uh, the people that have an eye for that, and they make the best documentaries, they make the best behind the scenes, is the people that want to do that kind of thing and love being up in the band's business and taking photos and filming and being on the bus. uh, I would love to have that, and I strive to deliver it as best as I can. But again, it is a definitely falls by the wayside on shoot day when we have so many other things going on.
Yeah. So thinking about what's coming in the weeks and the months ahead. So as we talk, we're a couple of weeks away from when Tower comes out,
Yeah.
and we mentioned at the beginning how you're going over to Australia to play some shows. What lies ahead for Dolly Dagger in April and beyond?
Yeah, I think in April, obviously we put that out. Um, I want to come back to LA once I go and deal with my Australian stuff. A lot of the time it's a visa trip, so I need to go and get another visa. Hopefully that goes through and we're all good, and I can come back. Otherwise, I'll be touring in Australia indefinitely, which is fun because I'm really glad the opportunity to find a band. You know, Jesse was meant to come with me, but things didn't work out on his end. So I have had to hire an entire band in Australia. But I think it's really great because last year I decided I wanted to be there more. And so I had been in and out a little bit more often than usual. And I think that's another money thing. I mean, we're going into like paying for flights, and I can do as much as I can work, you know. So as much as I can do my regular freelance work and my day jobs and the gigs that I pick up pays for the things that I can do. So if I'm working, I can do more stuff. If I'm not working, I'm kind of stuck. But last year I was very lucky to be in a position where I did pick up enough work to be able to travel and do the things I was trying to do. But ultimately I'd love to be a little bit more in between the two and spend some more time there. So I'm really happy to have found some people to play and to be part of this band and have these rehearsals, so that anything that comes up because of this or in the future and what we're trying to put together, we have the people to be able to play for us. And I'd love to have a 5-piece that I think would just help everything come to life from the record, because Jesse's playing a million things. Like there's real instruments, there's synths, there's the whole kit. We have a lot on track as a 3-piece, but as a 5 or 6-piece, I mean, we would have everything live, and I think that would just be my ideal situation. But having the band in Australia being rehearsed, being ready, and then being able to maybe come back in the summer and do a little more. That's my goal, to go there, is to try and, you know, garner up a little bit more interest and trying to reconnect and be there a little more often. Like I never intended to be away for so long in the sense of not playing, but pandemic. I'm just going to keep blaming that because it really took away so many resources for everybody, and so many. I couldn't leave. We were essentially stuck. No one could go anywhere anyway. So I was here. There was definitely a couple of years of not being able to be there, and then
Mm.
the recovery from that, financially, for everybody to just get back to a position where you can start to do these things again. So I'm really happy and grateful to be in a place where I can go back and I can play shows and hire my friends to play for me. So I'm looking forward to maybe seeing what that brings, and hopefully getting some more shows for the summertime. And then coming back here to America and doing a release show here at some point. We do have a show in June at the Whiskey with our friend Scum Love, which is going to be a really fun show. But yeah, I really want to put out another record. That's the goal, I think, now too. As soon as this was wrapped, I kind of said to Jesse, "All right, what's next? What are we doing next time?" So we wanted to do two EPs, but I think really time-wise, it's probably going to be one EP or an album. So we will see where that lands, but we have the material, we have all the songs that we would put on an album. The funny thing for us is like the creativity is never the issue. The songs are never the issue. Getting the money to do the songs is the issue. So having the material to put out a record is there, but whether or not we can afford to actually go the whole way, and I don't want to do it half. I want to do it the whole way. The songs need to be honored, and we'll see what I can conjure up.
And so over the course of the interview, we've talked about the sort of the community, we've talked about the online side of things, we've talked about the shows and making connections that way. We've talked about all the different sort of promotional aspects. As a final note, in terms of people engaging with you, with the music, people following you, knowing what you're doing, obviously Instagram is going to be a part of it, but how would you best like people to support Dolly Dagger?
What in any way they can. I think people always tend to miss things on the internet because of the algorithm, right? So essentially, I need to break through it for one, but it's not anyone's job to have to stay up to date with me. Um, when someone sees something online, it'd be great if they just did the like or the share, or jump on Spotify. And it really is like Spotify is a huge indicator for people looking,
Mm.
um, and following along, pressing like subscribing to things. I think is probably the most beneficial. Having the monthly listeners, having the subscribers on YouTube, people watching the videos, all of those things help and are free. I mean, they cost you the subscription to Spotify, of course, but if you're on it and you're using it, that's the best way I think to support an indie artist. I never want to ask people for money in that way. Like buy my stuff. Like if you can, great. But I would never force that upon anybody. But all of those ways where it's social, and interacting with us online, I think is the most beneficial in that capacity. So yeah, that would be great. Just stay in touch on the internet. TikTok and Instagram are probably the best places, and then obviously YouTube and Spotify, Apple Music, that kind of thing. Sharing online really helps. But then I also feel like it's no one's job. That's not anyone's job. It's not a fan's job
Yeah.
to have to share you, right? Like they share you if they want to. And it's really sweet when they do. So I'm very appreciative when someone takes the time to send something along. But also, I want them to like it more than anything. I want them to like it, to want to do that on their own,
Yep.
because they decided, I think this person would like this song, I'm going to send it to them, not because I asked them to do it, right? So,
Yeah. Well, I mentioned the supporting side of things, but I suppose there was another aspect that I wanted to include in that as well, which is for the people that do want to follow what you're doing.
mhm.
Is Instagram and TikTok then the best way for people to keep up to date with what's going on?
Yeah, I think so. I tend to post everything on Instagram very deeply in terms of multiple stories. And I guess that's difficult because if you don't catch the story in the 24-hour period, but
Mm.
I do tend to post everything online, especially shows and releases and what's coming out all on Instagram. TikTok is a little bit more behind the scenes, or a little bit more just into my silly, goofy moods and whatever kind of uh, debauchery we're getting up to, or whatever funny things I think I can put on there. But also we have a website, dollydaggerxo.com, has everything. So I have links to obviously all of the social media, and I tend to blog post occasionally on there. I think I've got that page turned off at the minute, but I generally update in a blog manner on there as well. And like all of our shows are on there. So that's really the hub, I guess, is the website.
Cool.
And I mean, people can subscribe to email as well. I send those out occasionally.
Nice. Well, Dolly, thank you very much. It was a
Thank you
pleasure
so
to talk to
much.
you.
My absolute pleasure, Tom. It's been very, very lovely. I always really appreciate when people take time to actually talk to artists and learn about them and ask questions. And it's really sweet that you spent a minute looking back into and asking thoughtful questions. I appreciate that so much.
Well, it's a pleasure for me. And yeah, I think it'll be really insightful as well for people listening, whether they are already fans or future fans of Dolly
Oh,
Dagger.
thank you. Yeah, hopefully future fans. That would be lovely.